My name is Stephen Long, and I host a show here on Rock Candy called Sacred Tension, the podcast about the spiritual discipline of asking questions. We cover topics from LGBT issues to faith and doubt and mental health. We talk to biblical scholars and have conversations about religious abuse and leaving faith and finding it again. We also talk to pastors and skeptics and cult experts who are all sorting out their own journey of faith. Please join me in these conversations on Sacred Tension right here on Rock Candy.
Welcome to the Eleventyseven podcast.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the very first Eleventyseven episode of the year 2020. Man, I am kicking this year off right with the flu. So I apologize if my voice is a little bit scratchy right now. I actually contracted some sort of viral illness towards the end of the year and spent absolutely all of my New Year's Eve party time just in bed, being sick. But I guess that means that the year can only get better from here, and I have a lot of good reasons to believe that that's going to be the case. We have a brand new album called Basic Glitches coming out January 17th. That is literally only 2 weeks away from right now, and I cannot wait to share this new music with you guys. Seriously, we've been hyping this thing for almost 3 months now. I just got off the phone with our good friends at VRP who do all of our vinyl pressing and stuff for the label here at Rock Candy, and they have assured me that all of the vinyl looks amazing. It's literally on the truck right now, its way to the Rock Candy warehouse, and we are getting ready to package all of those Kickstarter items and everything for all of you who were a part of the Kickstarter for the new record. We are getting ready to ship all of those out as quickly as we possibly can, so you can probably look forward to getting those packages before release day. And I just want to send out a very heartfelt thank you to everybody who helped us make this record possible, who donated financially to the record, who purchased vinyl or CDs or t-shirts or anything like that. Seriously, you guys have no idea how much that helps us out and what it does for morale around here at Rock Candy. It's amazing. So just want to send you some heart-shaped vibes for that. Hey, if you're anything like the rest of us, you are probably broke as shit at the beginning of the year because Christmas is so expensive. But you can go over to 11t7isalive.com right now and click on the pre-save button. It will take you to an area that you can save the new album to whatever digital streaming service you prefer, and it's free. Apple Music, Spotify, Pandora, any of those things, it's all right there. So yeah, if you want to find out what all this hype has been about, I encourage you to go pre-save that record. It would mean an awful lot to us, and it also helps us continue to keep doing things like this podcast. Speaking of which, we have an amazing show for you today. I get to sit down with a little piece of my childhood. Today on the show, we have Mikey from a band called the Huntingtons. And if you're as old as I am and grew up in this whole like weird tooth and nail era of music, that name probably sounds very familiar. The Huntingtons are probably best known for being these sort of like Ramones proteges. So they have a very specific style of punk rock that they adhere to. It is old school, it is good vibes, it is fun times. We are putting a link to this new record and everything you need to know about it in our show notes, so head on over there if you want to check this out. If there's one thing that I love, it is a great comeback story, and I am totally compelled by anybody who takes 17 years away from something and decides to scale that mountain once again. We talk an awful lot on this show about the importance of creativity and the importance of making progress in your own creative life and your own creative endeavors, and saying no to all the fear and all of the naysaying that sort of happens internally in your mind when it comes to putting new art and expression out into the world. And I absolutely love stories and narratives of dusting off rusty swords and going back into battle with them and finding new purpose for them. Not only that, I had an absolutely charming time with Mikey from the Huntingtons. He's a really solid dude with some fun stories and some really cool takes from his touring days. And I feel like our conversation turned into a really interesting snapshot of what he and the rest of their band is feeling on the eve of brand new music coming out from them at the end of January. We were having such a good time in this conversation that it ran pretty long. So please feel free to pace yourself for this conversation. And if you need to pause it and come back to it, you do you, boo. Thanks so much for spending time with us here on 11 Life. Without further ado, here is the wonderful time I got to spend with Mike Holt from the Huntingtons.
Hello? Hello?
Yep.
Hello. You got me?
Yes.
Yes. That's an interesting yes.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Check. Okay. Woo. Okay. Awesome. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
Okay. Awesome.
Yes.
Let me tone this thing down here for a second. Okay. Perfect. Let me see if I can get your FaceTime going. Oh man, thank you for being so cool with with issues.
No problem at all. Yeah.
As they arise. FaceTime looks good, and it looks like we're getting. Give me a little check real quick.
Check. Hello.
Oh yeah, that's it. Okay.
You good? All right, cool.
Let's just leave all of that in the show.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Great way to start. Perfect way to start.
It's punk rock, as it were.
Right.
Dude, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. So
Perfect.
you said you had 2 kids and you had stuff going on with them tonight?
Well, actually, I have 3 kids, but only 2 of them had something going on tonight. So
okay. Gotcha.
That's a good night. Yeah, both of my boys are in sports. One plays basketball, one plays travel soccer, which keeps us busy all year long. They don't stop the whole year. And then the girl is an artist. She does painting and she goes to an art high school. And the only extracurricular thing she does is Girl Scouts, which is also on Wednesdays, but every other Wednesday. So tonight was just a 2-kid night, not a 3-kid night. So kind of an easy night. Easy night for me.
Were you always this good at scheduling, or is this something that kids brought about in your life?
Well, I think it's double. It's kids, and then I'm actually my real job when I'm not being a rock star is I'm actually a supervisor for a small team of engineering technicians. So I'm constantly scheduling things. So
my gosh, from rock and roll to IT, that's
yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of every day is a scheduling logistical nightmare. So kind of used to it, figuring it out.
That's awesome. How old are your kids?
My youngest will turn 11 in January. And then I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. And the 15-year-old is my only girl and the other 2 are boys. And it's funny because yesterday at work, we had a little Christmas luncheon kind of thing there. We all got together, had some food and just kind of hung out for a while. And some of the younger guys that I work with are like, man, my kid's 15 months old. My kid's 3 years old. Does it get any better? And it's kind of weird, asking, what do you mean, does it get any better? I don't know, I kind of get what you're talking about.
They kind of give a really low baseline for how things should be.
Yeah, come on, guys. I get the diapers and the feeding and the constant needs or whatever. And one guy that was sitting next to me, he has a little bit younger kids than I do, but he described it perfectly. It was it's not that it gets better, it gets different. And it's as the kids get older, things just change, and you still have all the same stuff that you have to do when you have younger kids. It's just those things just change a little bit. They shift a little bit. They get different. And it's exactly right. So 11, 13, and 15, they're still a handful, but it's in a totally different way.
So your 15-year-old is a girl?
Yep.
Is she sassy as hell yet?
Oh my gosh. It's been that way probably for 3 years now. And it honestly doesn't help. She's been into art since she was in elementary school, and she's in what they call a magnet school here. I don't know if it's the same terminology everywhere, but you got to apply to get into it, and it's an art school. And
yeah,
it doesn't help that's a factor too, because the sass plus the oh man, it's crazy. Yeah. But on that note, to kind of maybe just sort of push a little bit of a tie back into the band thing, she did actually draw the cover to the new record. So that was actually a plus. We were like, hey, this is the idea we have for this album cover. Can you draw it? And she did, and it ended up.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Is this the same one that Jeff sent me?
I would assume so. It's kind of got a sugar skull kind of motif to it. Yeah, exactly.
I thought that cover art was so badass.
yeah, that was my daughter. She did that.
Man, that's awesome. You have to be a proud papa right now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like for that, sure, but like for the other stuff that she does, she's amazing. Like just absolutely incredible. Like I hate to say it, but like that particular thing that she did is cool. I love it. We're using it obviously, so we obviously thought it was cool, but the other stuff that she does like blows it out of the water. Like she's just so good at this stuff. So, but yeah, absolutely, yeah. So it comes with its ups and its downs.
That's awesome. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this on the show before, but I'm terrified that if one day I do have kids that I end up with a sporty one instead of a musical one, because I was like kind of an outcast in my family. I was like the oldest. And so I ended up getting all of the like artsy, I'm into poetry and music and like all these different, let's go to a museum and check things out. The rest of my family is not that way at all. And so I have this fear that like if I have a child and they end up being the exact opposite, I will be as difficult of a parent to them as my parents were to me. Because I have no way of relating to that. Like if anybody's ever seen me play sports, it's kind of like, what is he doing? What does he know how the game is played?
So from someone who is exactly like you, like I am awful at any sport. Like I was never a sport kid growing up. My parents, signed me up for baseball. Yeah. And I was terrible at it. And once they figured out I was terrible at it, they didn't push it. I played soccer for 1 year. They figured I was terrible at it. They did. I mean, the one memory I have from playing soccer as a kid was the ball hitting me right in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me falling on the ground. And they had to stop the game while I like get my breath back. And it's the only thing I ever remember about playing soccer. So I sucked at it. But that being the case, so I'm in the same boat as you. But that being the case, my youngest has been playing soccer now for 4 years in all year round soccer, like club soccer, pay oodles of money, have to work second jobs to pay for it, all that kind of crap. And but he's awesome at it. He loves it. And then that makes me love it too. So it's like you change, it changes you. You know what I mean? Like I know good and well, I'd never be able to get out there and do that. And I have no ambitions to ever be a sports guy. And I don't even care about sports other than my kids' sports. So, but it does it really does change you once you see the kids, coming up and really enjoying it, having a good time.
Yeah. So you feel like it heightens your levels of empathy when you have a kid, like you feel for them or with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like in my middle son, he plays basketball and I don't know anything about basketball. And the first time he joined the team and went and played and the refs are calling, I mean, oh my gosh, man, like he was like 11 years old or something when he started doing it. He's 13 now. And there's these refs there and they're calling all this stuff. And I'm like, what? What do you, I don't understand basketball. And I'm trying to argue with refs about
oh my gosh, you're that dad already.
Yeah. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. What are you doing? And so I calmed down. I scaled it back. I learned a little bit more. And like now when we go to the games, I'm like, all right, I get it. I'm starting to learn a little bit. Yeah. My ignorance is dialed back some. And I can kind of like be a little bit more enjoyable than just being like upset that these stupid rules exist that I never knew about. But yeah, so it does. It changes your perspective at least a little bit. I mean, you're not going to want to turn into like a sports guy because I couldn't care less about sports, but it does change your perspective a little bit about, the whole idea of having a kid that's more into sports than music, because none of my kids at the moment don't seem to be leaning towards any sort of musical interest.
And they're totally aware that you are in a punk rock band.
Yeah, absolutely. And they couldn't care less. Couldn't care less. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. That's awesome. So what was that like for you growing up? Like, I know that your band it feels like has been completely saddled with this. They're like the Ramones kind of a thing ever since like I heard of you guys. But what was your musical background? Was that just one color of it? Or okay.
Yeah. And honestly, like so me and Cliff met probably in like 1994, maybe 93, 94. So when I was in high school, and when we met, I was playing in a band with some other friends from high school that was just nothing but noise. So we were big into like Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., really just like loud, noisy type stuff. And that's what we did. And so when I met Cliff wasn't like a Ramones head. He was a metal head. Like he was like still into like, mid-late 80s metal type stuff. But he kind of had some songs that were bordering on more poppy type things, and we recorded little demos of some of his songs, and we just sort of just grew from there. And the Ramones they were in the background in my high school years, but they certainly weren't like at the top of my list of things that I strive to, figure out how to be and like be in a band like that kind of thing. So, I was way more into kind of like early 90s grunge type stuff than I was, into Ramones type stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, that was really where I came from. And then Cliff's background in sort of like, 80s metal type stuff, we didn't mesh at all. It was like a totally weird pairing when we met, that there was no real consistency there, or sort of like a common ground, so to speak.
Right.
And we sort of just found that together. So like after a little while of working together, we sort of just found that Ramones common ground and eventually got there. Like it took a long time. Like the first 2 records that we made weren't really Ramones inspired. Like they were probably more like Screeching Weasel, Queers, Green Day type inspired.
Okay,
stuff, all came from Ramones. I mean, obviously those bands wouldn't really have developed into what they were if they hadn't had that kind of background. Or whatever. We didn't hit that like straight Ramones stride until we sort of really got into it a little bit further than that. So a weird combination of just background influences sort of pushed us towards that one common thing. And just took off from there.
That's awesome. So at what point did you guys have a conversation that was like, we should totally ride this Ramones thing? Or was it something that you fell into? Or was it something where it was like, hey, this seems to work and we're booking a lot of gigs because we're doing some Ramones covers? I'm just kind of interested in what that origin was like for you guys, like how you actually ended up falling into it.
Yeah, I mean, and this is going to sound like super unbelievable, but no, none of that. Like none of it was like pushed. None of it was pushed by like, hey, this seems to be working, because it didn't work. Like, honestly, like being in like the mid late 90s, or I guess late 90s, Ramones style band wasn't like, we weren't getting phone calls from, different booking type places or clubs or other bands saying, wow, you guys are really awesome at this Ramones thing. You should, like it wasn't getting us anything. It wasn't getting us like necessarily in with certain scenes or certain bands or certain groups or whatever. I know it's probably difficult to believe, but we just did it because it's just what we wanted to do. And it just didn't help us at all. It really didn't. Okay. So if it helped us at all, it helped us with like 1% of like the total listening audience out there.
Right.
It didn't push us to, selling tons of albums or selling out shows or anything like that. And as a matter of fact, in that time frame, like we caught a lot of grief for it. These days you don't catch as much grief for it. And I don't really have an answer to why that is. Like what changed from, the late 90s to the late, what do you call this time frame? Is that what it is?
Like the early 2000s kind of a thing?
Or we're into like the late 2000 and teens. It's like, I don't know how to say that, but whatever it is, 20 years later, whatever 20 years later is called, for some reason you don't quite catch as much crap as like you did in the late 90s for being a lot of people were like,
my generation pedals almost exclusively in nostalgia. So if something happened, if something happened 3 minutes ago, we're like, oh my God, do you remember when?
So I mean, like, to kind of just get back to the root of your question, it was just like, man, these guys do this the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
And we want to do things the way they're supposed to be done. So we're going to try our best to take that and put our spin on it and just do it. And then that's just what we did.
So when you say they were doing that the way it's supposed to be done, what does that look like in band meetings? Or like you're having these discussions about like, man, these guys really have it dialed in. What did that look like for you? What are those qualities that you were thinking about?
Really poor songwriting. that sounds terrible, right? But now listen, okay, so the Ramones would do things like they would hitch on a certain beat that doesn't really make sense, or they would stop on a certain note where it's like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to stop there. You're supposed to stop like one measure forward. Yeah. And these like little kind of things, because they weren't professional musicians. They were, street dudes that just picked up the guitars and the bass and drums and just learned to do what they did. They loved the 50s and the 60s style pop songs, and they infused those into like punk rock, and they were pissed off that disco and like, 12-minute guitar solos were happening, and they just stripped it all down and did the best that they could with it. And it's like, man, yeah, that's just raw. It's cool. It's real. That's what we need to try to capture that. We need to try to do, like, just capture that raw realness. And there really weren't band meetings. Like, it was just sort of like, let's write a song. We want it to be about a fake girl named Joni or Jackie or whoever. Actually, Allison's actually a real girl. Honestly, that one's real. And I would say probably 50% of them, 50 might be a little high, but there's a good chunk of them where the name actually does really correspond to like a real person. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you're just getting together and just trying to like make something real.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. I mean, it wasn't like a planned out, this Ramones song does these things, so we need to do those things too.
Right.
It was just sort of like, they did it and we love it, and we need to try to like capture that just cool, raw, real feeling.
Right.
And it just sort of fell into place. I mean, when we did it, it just sort of happened. And, we ended up doing 2 Ramones cover records. The first one, you can tell we had no idea what we were doing. It's just terrible. And,
do you mean from like a recording standpoint or from a...
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like at that point, we didn't even know what we were doing at all, period, from a recording standpoint. I mean, we were just like super, super new, super fresh at it, had just recorded Sweet 16, which was the first record. Didn't have a clue what we were doing, didn't have a producer. We recorded with Nick Rotundo at Clay Creek in Delaware, and he was an awesome engineer, but he wasn't like guiding us on like what to do and how to do things. So we were completely on our own, which was a bad idea because we didn't know what the hell we were doing.
Right.
And it wasn't until we really recorded basically High School Rock with Master Giorgini out at Sonic Iguana, where he really just taught us. He basically just taught us, this is how you craft things. This is how you put things together. And once that clicked, it was like, yep, we got it. Let's go. And then we recorded the second Ramones record, or the second Ramones cover record, which then led us to, getting the shows with Joey Ramone up in New York City at CBGB's, and just sort of solidified that whole thing. Like, okay, yeah, we figured this out. Now we know what we're doing. Like, we didn't know what we were doing. We were kids. Well, Cliff wasn't a kid. He's always been super old, but everybody else was a kid. And, we were going in there and we're banging away at the songs and we're doing the best we can, but we didn't really know what we were doing until Mass kind of just sort of sat us down and said, all right, guys, this is how you do it.
So those, I love talking about those kinds of experiences, those kind of like aha moments. We had the ability to work with a few different producers within our time at Sony, because obviously they could afford them and they didn't trust us to record anything, and they probably shouldn't have at the time. And it was always, I loved working with different producers, even ones that I thought were kind of assholes, because they got to where they are doing something really specific. And so everybody has their own sugar and spice that they add to those things. Like some of them are more about songwriting and other ones are more about tone. And everybody kind of has their own approach to composition or how to trim the fat off of songs. Or here's how you approach something that might be a radio single. And here's we're just going to scratch our own itches over here. So I'm interested to know what are the most pertinent lessons that you drew from those sessions. It seems like it was kind of a pivotal moment for you guys.
So this is going to sound super obvious and really lame.
Are you going to say staying in tune?
Oh, no. We knew how to do that.
Okay.
Like, we knew how to tune. But, okay, so it's a step up from super. It's just sort of lame, not super lame. It's just sort of lame and like sort of obvious. But simple things like changing notes on a kick drum.
Oh, okay.
We were doing whatever we wanted to do, and we were like, oh, dude, whatever. And it's like, no, dude, you shift chords when the kick hit. And it's like, got it. All right, you lock in, you figure it out, and then it just tightens everything up. And nowadays, it's like, or now, 25 years later, it's like, duh, of course you change chords. But at the time, in 1997, when we were doing this, it was like, oh yeah, we probably should pay attention to what the drums are doing and make sure that everything is nice and tight. And whoa, okay, yeah, that changes things. Okay, we got it. He helped a ton with harmonization. I was pretty crappy at coming up with just chorus harmonies and things like that. And he sort of taught us kind of how to make those work.
Yeah.
Just mostly from like a pop perspective. What else? So we were just transitioning also into downstrokes. The first two records weren't all downstrokes. Ramones did all downstrokes.
Yeah.
On guitars and bass. And we were just transitioning into that. That was a huge thing to have to figure out too. Hey, you can't write songs that are just ridiculously fast, and you just physically can't do that sort of thing. There's all sorts of like just obvious, just a lot of things that now seem like super obvious. But at the time, to a band that was just starting out and getting an opportunity to record with someone who had done so many albums in that genre and in that scene, there's so many Screeching Weasel records and Queers records. He already knew all this stuff, and it's like he already knew how to make that style of music work.
Yeah.
And we were wanting that, and he got us there. It's weird to say, but he's like the sole reason that after High School Rock, the second record we recorded with him, we never used a producer again.
Oh, wow.
He got us to the point where we figured out how to do it and what to do, and then we just didn't need it anymore. And so,
oh my gosh, he taught a man to fish.
Yeah, there you go. There's the analogy or metaphor right there.
I love it.
Yeah, the Get Lost, Plastic Surgery, Songs in the Key of You, the self-titled record, and then our brand new record. 5 records after High School Rock. None of them had a producer. We did it all ourselves.
Oh my gosh!
And because of the stuff we learned in those experiences.
And I love that.
Yeah.
And you should not feel at all like those are lame epiphanies to have. I feel like, I don't know how much you know about like what we do here, but Rock Candy is also a studio. So we have bands come in all the time, or I'll work with different bands on different projects. And the whole like locking your kick and your bass together is news to some people. Like, because a lot of times like within bands, you're in a band because you are passively consuming music and you feel that like attraction to sort of recreate what you're passively consuming, but you don't necessarily understand what all of it is. And so just these little things that like change your thinking, like, hey, look what happens to the skeleton of the song whenever you're locking that kick and that bass together, or whenever you're all cohesively playing as a band, not just coming up with parts on your own, but thinking about how it works together. And here's what it looks like when it does work together, and here's what it looks like when it's not working together, which is basically everything you've been doing up until this very moment. Where we're changing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Like, it's such a simple thing, but if it's not there, it makes a huge difference. And like, I'm not a big music fan in general, and that's a weird thing to say, I guess, because I'm super critical. It's not like my band's great or anything. Like, I'm not going to sit there and say like, oh yeah, I'm this, what I do is the standard. And if anything that is below what I do, I just don't like it. That's not what I'm saying.
Sure.
Like, I'm incredibly critical about everything that I listen to. And it drives my wife crazy because, she'll put something on. She's like, oh, this song's so good. And I'm like, yeah, but listen to how many crash cymbals are and it's like, and then once I pointed out, she's like, why did you have to say that? Now I can focus on how many crash cymbals. But it's like, so if there's it kind of sucks actually, because like the critical way that I think about songs that I listen to kind of probably makes me not enjoy things that I would maybe otherwise enjoy. So that kind of, and, it's just that whole experience back then and all the way up through now has just sort of put my mind in a sense of like really just analyzing everything. I'm not a fan of like auto-tune. We didn't use a click track on this new record. We've used click tracks in the past, but this new record, most of it we recorded in a live setting. We were all set up. We recorded the drums and the guitars and everything live, and then we kind of went back and fixed things as needed.
Oh my God, that terrifies me. Can't believe you did that.
Oh yeah, we locked in all of our tones, bass, both guitars, not vocals, because I hadn't even had the lyrics completed by, when we were in there tracking like guitars and drums and everything. But
is this typical for you, showing up without all the lyrics done?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Even when we were doing the records out in Indiana with Mass, like we slept in the studio the whole time we were there, and I would just stay up at night after the recording session was done and just start writing stuff. So yeah, I never finished lyrics before drums, guitars and all that kind of stuff are done. It's always, right up until the last minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of it is what we recorded in the room together. And if we screwed something up, we went back obviously and fixed it, and we did some solo overdubs and things like that. But a good chunk of this new album was done right there, like in the room. All four of us are that way. Like we want that kind of just live, raw kind of feeling.
So what is it about? What is it that makes you guys feel attracted to not using a click? Because for me, because the world that I live in, that feels like such heresy. But also understanding that like a lot of the stuff that I listened to growing up that wasn't new wave, a lot of times wasn't done with a click. And I think that my generation in particular has just grown up where like that was one of the very first things that anybody ever taught us. Like in different studios that we used recording growing up, they were like, it's click or die.
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, let's see, Sweet 16 was not with a click. Our first record was not with a click. I believe both of the records we did with Master Genie, Fun and Games and High School Rock, I'm pretty positive we did both of those with the click. Get Lost in Plastic Surgery absolutely were with a click. So we've done it for sure.
Yeah.
But this time around, we spent about 10 months writing this album and like rehearsing it, getting together, rehearsing it, rehashing things, rewriting things, rearranging things. And we got to a point where we just felt comfortable playing the songs just as they were. Like we just didn't need it. And so what we ended up doing, the rehearsal before we went to the studio, we had a little drum machine next to our drummer, Chris, and we clocked in the beats per minute on the drum machine. And we locked in like how fast we wanted the song to be. And then we set a click in the studio to start us off. Mm-hmm. To sort of just make sure that we at least started in the right tempo that we wanted the song to start with. Where it went after that, hopefully it kind of stayed close. And then boom, we dropped it out and we just played it and just kind of let it feel as natural as we could possibly let it feel. And we had a lot of faith in our drummer Chris too, to just sort of just like take it and just make it what it needed to be.
Yeah.
And when I listen to it, being the super critical dude that I am, I can hear some things where it's like, man, that sped up, that slowed down a little bit. I think most people who aren't studio people or super critical about things probably won't notice it at all because it's not like dramatic type differences. But I like it. I like that little bit of just sort of, you just feel it and you're in the moment. And if it kicks up a little bit or drops back a little bit, that's okay. It isn't like, oh my gosh, you can just tell that it does it. And I like that just sort of feeling it kind of thing. And it did make it a little bit harder when you did overdubs to just make sure you're like, so that's the thing, right?
Right.
Or if there's any pauses, it's like, oh crap, what are we going to do now? We paused and then we have to kind of kick back in.
Yeah, it can start to get sloppy really quick when you're throwing overdubs.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but we worked on it so much that I feel really good about it. Like So
did you guys self-record, or did you say that you for this new record? Did you self-record it, or did you work with somebody?
So we went to a studio in Baltimore called Orion, and there's a super cool engineer there, Joe Tracy. He pretty much runs the whole place. It's like it's a really interesting place. It's like a huge rehearsal space. So they have probably, I want to say like maybe like 20 rehearsal rooms there, and they have a live venue there, and they have a studio there, and it's all like in this industrial park down in the city, and it's just kind of crazy. We never even knew it existed, but we found him, went down, started to build a relationship with him, and he engineered the whole thing. But no producer there saying, yeah, do that again, nah, change this, change that kind of thing. So just all doing that kind of on our own.
So who ends up falling into that position? Because ultimately there's somebody who's like, it's not good enough for me, and we need to track it again. Is that you?
Yeah, I mean, it's me a lot of times. Yeah, it's me a lot of times, and it's Cliff a lot of times. It honestly, just we're probably the ones that are the most critical. I'm not saying that Chris and Josh aren't critical, but we kind of, having the history that we have together, we really do kind of look at it from from probably a little bit different of a perspective than they do, and just, not necessarily, it's just what's best for that song.
Yeah, of
course. We got to do what's best for this song. Maybe that last take, maybe you personally liked it better, but it's just, you know what? For the song, it's got to be different. And I mean, what's kind of cool, what I will say about the current lineup of the band, we've had so many people in this band over the years, but the current 4 people really do sort of stay on the same page a lot.
Yeah.
Which is really unusual. And, somebody's like, let's just try that one more time. That wasn't quite right. Okay. Yep. Let's go ahead. There weren't really disputes about it or arguments over it or anything.
Do you feel like that's a luck of the draw in terms of like meeting the right people that all just kind of are on the same wavelength? Or do you think that might be something that you have developed over time from being in a band for all of these years and like learning like interpersonal communication and like managing different personalities and like how you can all survive together? Like, I wonder, because I know that being in a band gives you a very specific toolkit for how to handle people most of the time. At least that's been my experience, is like, there's not many situations I can't go into and figure out how to manage what's happening interpersonally with people. My friends might disagree with that, actually, now that I say it out loud. But I feel like a 34-year-old Matt handles things totally differently than 18 or 19-year-old Matt ever would have dreamt of handling people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's the situation. Yeah. I mean, I'm 43-year-old Mike, who back in, 20 some years ago, definitely did things way different. So that's absolutely a growth, maturity, understanding, realizing that other people's opinions do count. They do matter. That's huge. It's a huge hurdle to overcome, to like get past yourself and realize that there's other people involved here. But for sure, I think, to answer the question, I think it's a combination of the two. It's like a luck thing that you manage to get personalities that mesh so well together. Just the experience and the growing of just understanding how to handle people. And when the personalities mesh so well, then that experience of how to handle people doesn't have to be quite as great as it would if they didn't. So it makes it a lot easier when you have people who are mostly on the same page as you. It's like, oh, wow, this is great. It really, the whole process of this album, we never got into any kind of disagreements about cutting songs or, nope, you brought that to us and that really didn't make the cut. It's like, okay, yeah, it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, when we look at everything, that doesn't. And it was just pretty much a mutual agreement all the way through that these are the songs that we're going to go with. This is the arrangements. Everybody's good with them. And it was probably the longest writing process, but probably the easiest one.
That's so interesting, because I was going to say, you had mentioned that you guys spent 10 months workshopping this record. And I mean, I know personally that the older that you get, particularly for people that were in bands before, it's like you end up with all of this kind of creative baggage from years of doing it. But also at the same time, now everybody that I grew up with playing in bands has families and kids and extenuating circumstances and more complicated realities than we ever did when we were just all loading up in vans together and touring around the country. And so 10 months of dedicated time is a hefty chunk of change, especially for people with families. So I just want to say, bravo that you guys were able to workshop it for that long. But what does that look like for you personally? Is it something where your wife and kids are like, yeah, we get it. It's totally cool. Or is it a strain?
It's a strain at times. I don't want to discount anybody else in the band's experience, because I know that they're strained as well.
Yeah.
But all of the rehearsals took place at my house. So the basement is where we kind of keep all of our gear. It's where we rehearse for shows. It's where we wrote the record. It's where I have things taped all along the walls.
Yeah.
Of this is song number 1, and this is the arrangement of it, and then scratching it out and making new notes. I mean, for 10 straight months, a portion of our house was consumed with that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course.
And it's loud, obviously, and so we're putting the rest of the family out for hours at a time on weekends, and But so yeah, it's for sure a strain, and it's obviously a strain for everybody else too, because Cliff and Josh, our guitar players, they live 2.5, 3 hours away. So it's travel time for them to and from being away from home. Chris, our drummer, he just had his first baby about 15 months ago. So that was all during, he was writing this record all during the time that his kid was like basically like, a month to like 10 months old.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations, Chris. That's an accomplishment.
Yeah, right. So there's he's taking time away from that. And obviously all of us are working full time. We do not make money off this band. Nobody lives off the band. Obviously, there's just every once in a while, maybe you buy a dinner because you made a couple bucks off.
Was that ever a reality for you though? It
was.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and don't get me wrong, making a living is relative, right? Like, when we quote unquote made a living, I lived with family.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything. Like I owned nothing. I had a room at a relative's house that I could stay at when I wasn't touring.
But dude, that was everybody. That was everybody that I knew. Like we were all doing that. Like I was living in our manager's basement. Yeah, it was ridiculous. I had a car I was still making payments on that I was just like barely getting by. I was not making enough money to pay rent anywhere. And so literally our manager had this basement with no air or water in it. And I convinced him to let me put a futon down there. And when we were not on tour, I was down in that basement with no windows, just demoing shit. Like every chance that I had. And it didn't affect, well, I say it didn't affect me. It probably did, and probably not for the better. At the time, that was all I cared about. I didn't care about windows or socializing or going out and having a normal life. I just, in that moment, was so into the band that I was like, I don't care. Like, it's not raining on me, so I must be blessed.
Yeah. I mean, you always feel like, oh, the next big thing is just a couple shows away. It's just like, I mean, and it's not even like a big, not to say like, oh man, like we're just going to make it after a little while. It's just like, it's just going to just keep getting just a little bit better. The more we do it, it's just going to keep getting a little bit better.
Yeah.
And of course, for us, it didn't. At one point, okay, so we toured pretty extensively for a couple of years. And at one point, I had a pretty good job and I quit it to just tour full time. The job and the touring were meshing a little bit okay. I was able to do it, but not quite as much as I wanted to. And then it got to a point where it's like, you know what? The tours are coming pretty good. The shows are coming pretty good. I'm just going to roll the dice and gamble a little bit. I'm going to leave the job and just do it full time. And the very next tour we did, we were 6 dates into it. Trailer got broken into.
Oh my God.
In Dallas, Texas, and everything was gone.
It's always Texas for some reason.
Yeah, right.
It's fucking no man's land. Texas.
Man, push those people down into Mexico. Like, let them be Mexico. No, I'm just kidding. I love Texas. Texas is great. But bad luck. Right?
Sure.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And, a month and a half after I quit a really good job, which I'm back in now and have been ever since that happened. I got the job back and have been working it ever since.
Oh, congratulations.
Just so luck there too, right?
Yeah.
So, bad luck one way, good luck another. But yeah, I mean, we went for it, and 6 days into a tour, we get robbed. And we finished that tour. We did another 5 weeks of like borrowing stuff from other bands and eventually just buying some new equipment back. But it just,
do you remember who you were on the bill with at the time? Or was it just like a bunch of spotlights?
We did not have a band that we were traveling with on that specific tour.
Right.
We were on our own. We played in Dallas, and I can't remember the name of the club that we played at, but we drove next date was Oklahoma City. And so we drove about an hour and a half north of Dallas, and we got a hotel, and that's where we got robbed at the hotel. We finished that tour, but it was not easy. It took a toll on everybody. We were expecting to be able to pay our bills, the minimal bills we all had at home for various things. But it's hard to pay bills while you're also trying to like buy new guitars and new amps.
Of course.
So that, terrible type of thing. And that just basically killed that. Like we didn't tour anymore after that. We were done. We did We did one more quick little stint in Europe a couple months later that we had already had booked. But then after that, that was it. And then from 2003 till now, we haven't gone on like any kind of actually tour. We've just done dates and weekends and things like that. But that was it. You know, that kind of killed that whole idea of doing it as like a job or, you know, for any sort of.
Yeah,
like,
that's so interesting. It's interesting to think about the overlaps of tours for bands like, God, who did we have on here a few months ago? Jeff from Squad 50 came on the show talking about their touring experiences. And I think we had Danny from Element 101, who, by the way, I get the impression talking to Danny, he probably would have let you borrow a guitar amp. I don't know if you ever like ran into that band or not, but he is like the nicest dude I've ever met.
All the time. Like we were in it. They were generally from the same area that we were from. So we played with them a ton, a ton back in the day. Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But yeah, I mean, we had people do that too. Like we had a friend of ours out in California donate a bass amp. We had people donating money, you know, all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, even once you get all your stuff back, it's like this total morale killer. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it just sucked. And I mean, one of the guys we had playing guitar for us, you know, he ended up having to go home before the end of the tour. So we finished it as a 3-piece. It was a rough time. It was a super rough time.
Yeah.
So, you know, but eventually we sort of figured out, you know what, we don't have to like aim so high. You know what I mean? This doesn't have to be something we do. We can have jobs and still just do this for fun. And, you know, and once that really sunk in, it changed everybody's perspective. And anybody that's been in the band since then has been just, this is just something that we do because we like doing it. And we don't have a label that we're obligated to, or any sort of like necessarily schedule that we're obligated to. So we can just do whatever we want. And as long as that's the case, then we're just going to keep doing it. We'll just do it whenever we want to.
It sounds like you figured out how to crack the code of like deriving joy from your band.
Yeah,
because bands destroy you if they're in control. But if you're in control of the band and you're setting your own expectations and you're not allowing the band as this like mystical force to completely ruin your life, then you can have a healthy relationship with it. But it's not easy to do. So it's cool that it seems like you guys have figured that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have. I don't want to say that we have. I think it feels like we have. To, you know, and even making the new album was something that took us a really long time to come to terms with, because we've been back together and playing shows. You know, this whole, you know, breaking up and theft thing happened way back in the like, you know, early to mid 2000s.
Yeah.
And then, you know, since then we've been active here and active there. But like for the last, you know, 5 or so years, we've been, you know, playing shows and getting out and doing things. And, you know, the whole idea of like making a new album was like, well, geez, that sort of puts a little bit of a commitment on the table. Like, you know, you put something out, you can't just like throw it out there and just and not do anything, not do any work at all. Like you got to do a little bit of work, right?
Got to define the relationship.
Yeah, you got to. I mean, so it took a while for us to even get to terms with like, do we even want to do something new? Just keep playing the old stuff or do something new. And we came around to it, and here we are.
That's awesome, man. I absolutely love that. I wanted to, let's see here. I had made a few notes before we started our whole thing. When I told my wife, Jessica, that I was going to be doing this show with the Huntingtons, she just looked at me and goes, "Fun and games."
Oh,
and
wow.
I was like,
okay.
oh my gosh. she went and pulled out this CD of Fun and Games. And I was like, oh my gosh, I remember you bringing that into our marriage. This is like probably the most nerdy thing, but I thought you could appreciate it because it's your record. But yeah, I actually remember the weird time in which I was involved in this scene. I'm pretty sure I found out about your band before I knew who the Ramones were. And then because you guys were drawing so many comparisons to the Ramones, I ended up checking out the Ramones. And I grew up in a super like conservative, very sheltered sheltered home that I was constantly trying to break out of. And I was like, oh my gosh, something even more edgy than what I'm listening to now. And so I just got this entire new world. Like the Ramones opened up, like the Clash and the Sex Pistols and like that whole genre. And it was amazing for me growing up to be exposed to all of that. And your band was the gateway because I had seen you written up and compared to the Ramones.
That's honestly not. I mean, that's a really, I don't want to say that that there's just millions upon millions of people that have that story, but like we've heard that you guys introduced me to the Ramones. Like that's like and to be honest, like I'm the same way. Like I was brought up in a super strict conservative family as well. Yeah. And when I had friends at school who were like, hey man, Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, you check this out. You check this record out. I'm like, and I take it home and I pop it in my Walkman, or I pop the cassette in my Walkman and I listen to these songs. I'm like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to play this on like out loud. Yeah. Like my parents, they will never allow this. Right. And so, dude, I'm not kidding. Like my dad had this like a dual tape deck where it allowed you to play put one tape in, play it, and then record it onto the other one, like a dual thing.
A dual dub.
But the cool thing is like this one, if you listen to it live, you could hit a pause button on the record one. Yeah. And it would pause the recording and then you could unpause it. And I literally would go through and make censored copies of like all of those records when I was a kid. Like I had an Appetite for Destruction censored version where I memorized all the words and I could cut out all the fucks and all the all the other things. And so that way when I played it in the house, they didn't hear it.
So that by the time you got it to your dad, it was 0 fucks given.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a little harder. It was a little harder once I got into my like rap phase and I had to censor like Eazy-E records and NWA. That was a little tougher. But the Guns N' Roses record was super easy to do. But yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Like I was in that position too, and the only way that I had like a breakout was just friends from school and just being introduced to things like that and hiding it from the parents and censoring it to a point where I could at least, make it reasonable to play without them freaking out. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea of like, you grew up in this kind of like closed off environment and then you don't discover the bands that influence the nice clean ones that you listen to until after the fact. Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, all the time, man. Like that's just like a total like, and people would say, and it's so weird because people will say things like, man, I didn't know the Ramones before you. And then I go back and listen to the Ramones and, you guys do that better than the Ramones. And I'm like, oh man, don't say that. Like, please don't say that. Like, I don't want to hear it. Please don't tell me that.
I feel like they're two different things. So I might be speaking out of turn here and I hope this isn't offensive, but it's actually meant as a compliment. It's to the best of my ability. I feel like there's a specific kind of energy that comes from the Ramones, from their vocal delivery, from the recording techniques that were used, from how cutting edge all of that was, that it's sort of encapsulated in that specific time frame, in that fidelity, in that energy, and it's culturally appropriate to a specific time in music. And I would say that when I was getting into your band, I was like, there was this kind of thought that I had that, oh my gosh, Huntingtons is actually easier to listen to because the fidelity was better. Does that make sense? Like, the drums are punchier. Everything's a little bit clearer. Everything's a little more appropriate to my ears. Whereas I was not listening to music when the Ramones became a band. You know what I mean? Like I was just a little kid. Right. So going back to that feels like stepping back into this whole like lo-fi super to tape, probably using like shitty old tape that other people recorded on and that sort of a thing. But so I can understand that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And yeah, I mean, I guess if I didn't have like whatever kind of attraction I do, however you describe it, to the Ramones, and I would go back and listen to that first, self-titled album, I'd be like, man, excuse me, this sounds like garbage. Like, this is terrible. Like I would feel the same way. Yeah. But like, once you've locked into it, it's, now as far as like old Ramones records, like Road to Ruin, it still has that kind of old sound where if a kid was to listen to it today, like a a young Green Day fan, let's say, that listens to these super polished, hugely produced records that sound wonderful, in 2019, goes back and listens to that record, they're like, good grief, is like a demo or something? This sounds terrible. But like, I love the sound of that album. Like I wouldn't mind making a record that sounded just like it, like drum tones, guitar tones, everything. I just love it. And I think there is just this sort of connection that you have to have with the band in order to overcome that whole idea of like, it was recorded in the 70s and it doesn't sound modern. It's not beautiful and doesn't have that big, crazy radio type sound to it or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally understandable. Yeah, for sure.
Man,
no doubt.
That's awesome. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about specifically was how you guys ended up on Tooth and Nail, because even as a kid, I remember like seeing your stuff kind of put alongside all of these other like Christian acts and artists and things. And even when I was a kid, I kind of felt like all of that was a little bit horseshit. But you guys in particular stuck out to me as I was like, I don't understand what's happening from a marketing standpoint here. How do they fit in with these bands being a band who is constantly garnering these comparisons to and doing re-recordings of Ramones songs? Like, it seems like you should just let them do their own thing. Like, let people like this for what it is and don't try to sell it alongside, I don't know, DC Talk or whatever the hell everybody's listening to. You know what I mean? It's just like, this is not the right thing.
So when we started off, probably in 95 or so, before the first record came out, we had friends in bands in, the general area that we were in, which is, Northern Delaware, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania type area.
Yeah.
And we would play shows with them. And most of the bands were in the quote unquote, Christian punk scene.
Okay.
And all the members of the band in 95 or whatever, all Christians or whatever, we didn't focus our band at that point on any sort of like ministry related type stuff or spiritual type stuff. It was just fun. We were just singing songs about girls and, mimicking Green Day and Screeching Weasel and eventually the Ramones and things.
Yeah.
And so there was no like quote unquote Christian aspect to it, but we played with those bands. We fell into that scene and we sort of merged into that whole group, which eventually led us to the 2-record deal that we did with Flying Tart, which was a small little independent label. I guess you can call them a Christian label. They weren't really much of a label really at all.
Sure.
They put out a couple of things, and most of their distribution was in Christian marketplaces. And then the whole deal with Tooth and Nail, how Tooth and Nail came about after we recorded Fun and Games with Master Genie, which was on the Flying Tart label.
Yeah.
And we played Cornerstone that year. It started to spark some interest from Tooth and Nail. That at that point they were signing up all the punk bands, and most of it was more like West Coast, new school, punk rock or whatever.
Right.
So we didn't quite fit in with that necessarily. Through the years after that, like Tooth and Nail signed bands and they kept pushing them into the Christian market that necessarily weren't pushing any sort of message that would be appropriate. I don't know, appropriate's not the right word, but like they just weren't pushing any sort of Christian message.
They weren't a part of the evangelical agenda of the time.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't like, they weren't apologists. They weren't pushing any sort of any certain thing, but they would just still put them in that market and just kind of soak up anything that they could get. And we kind of got soaked up into that as well. And then Tooth and Nail just picked us up after the Fun and Games record and just kept pushing us into that market. But then Tooth and Nail ended up getting distribution into non-Christian markets as well, obviously.
Right.
And being able to distribute it to other areas. And that put us in a really weird spot because it's like, here we were just a band that just wrote songs that were every bit the same as like what the Queers would write or Screeching Weasel would write or the Ramones would write, but we didn't cuss in them. We didn't swear in them. We didn't have any kind of like, sort of, confrontational type lyrics or anything.
Right.
But they're pushing it into this particular market, which means it's a really weird way of saying it, but all the punk rock kids that weren't into the Tooth and Nail Christian
I totally get it. You're just put under a ridiculous microscope for everything that you do.
Like oh, I can't listen to the Huntingtons because they're on Tooth and Nail, and Tooth and Nail is a Christian label. And then, but see, the problem was for us, it was like a double-edged sword, because then you had people who were really expecting you to be delivering this powerful message that would say, man, the Huntingtons suck. They're on Tooth and Nail, but they don't talk about Jesus. So you get it from both ends. Like, you get it from the people who were like, I can't listen to you because you're on this label, and I can't listen to you because you don't talk about Jesus. And so it's like, man, we really just didn't find, there was no home for us, really. Like, it was just, we just sort of fell into it, and we made great friends with all the bands we toured with back then. We had a really good relationship with Tooth and Nail the whole time we were with them. Yeah. Like, there's no complaints about it whatsoever. I'm sure you can talk to a whole bunch of different bands that maybe have a different story or maybe have a different take on that whole thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But we never expected them to, like, make us rich or, provide us with things that we didn't deserve or whatever the case may be. But they were always fine. We had no issues with it. But it put us in a weird spot. Yeah. And it's partially our doing. It's, we sort of just went with the flow. We did what just sort of naturally came about. And it put us in that spot of, like, both camps being a little suspicious of us, I guess you could say. Like,
well, sometimes there's no way to know how your decision in the moment is going to age. You know what I mean? Like, okay, even if you're just kind of doing like a SWOT analysis for, should we sign with Tooth and Nail or not? It's like, well, this could turn out one way. It could turn out the other way. It's like a total.
I'm sorry. No. My son's asking me, what were you asking me?
You want me to leave the light on?
Yes, please leave the light on. He's going to bed asking me if I want to leave the light on. I'm like, I can't hear you, dude. What are you saying? All right. So yes, should we or should we not? Yes.
It seems like I've heard this story a few different times. It's just a weird, like late 90s, early 2000s time to be a band. And like Tooth and Nail seems like this really weird bridge that everyone, or that a lot of bands got stuck on. But like everybody's kind of in the middle of it saying, like, we don't really know where to go from here because both sides are on fire. So like, what do you want us to do? And you just end up kind of being stuck there in that weird place where we experienced a lot of that too, where we were like, at the time that we got signed, all of us considered ourselves to be Christians. Not all of us are now, but at the time we thought, okay, this kind of makes sense. Like, and maybe we were naive and we just trusted the system, and we were like, people will get what this is and what we're about, and we can exist in this ecosystem where we're not on board with all of this like evangelical stuff, but like we have a specific set of thoughts and ideas and theology about the world, at the time that we think is pretty compatible, and let's do this because nobody else is offering us a record deal right now. And I think we can make this thing work. And so you do it, and you have no idea that once you get in there, that most of the people that make up this market have all these unwritten expectations of what they want you to be as a person and what they want you to be as a band and what they want you to say from stage. And it was bonkers. It ultimately just burned us out on all of it. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to be a part of that kind of gives you a weird way of looking at the world and sort of holding everything religious at a distance because you're not sure what it wants from you or what it requires of you.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, I think this seems like totally like a stupid hypothetical, but like if you had flashed forward everything we did from, 25 years ago to now, and we just had all the knowledge that we have now, and you put us in the same position, we would have handled it totally differently. At least I think we would have. I mean, I know that's not realistic. It's not a real thing to think about, but like, it's like you said, like you're in a position, here's someone who's saying, hey, we want to put your records out. And you're like, yes. And you're already kind of like, you already have all your friends' bands in this scene, and you're already just sort of involved, and you're doing it. And it's like, we don't really belong here. Like nothing that we do makes sense here at all.
Right.
But sure, let's do it. Yeah. And so you go do it. And then the expectations are that like, this is going to be something really great. And you end up feeling like, oh man,
like you said, there's this certain view of a group of people who are like, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. And then there's this other group of people that are on the other side of the fence that are saying you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. And you're just kind of caught in the middle of it. Like, ooh.
And you're not sure if any of them have your best interest in mind.
Yeah, totally. It's like, I mean, like, look, we're writing, 3-chord pop punk songs that are like super simple to just gravitate to. You don't have to be like you don't have to be a fan of like a certain genre necessarily. You just have to like simple pop music, and like if you like it, awesome. If you don't, you don't. But like, why would you inject like these ideologies into it where if like I don't align with what you think about this certain thing, that all of a sudden like I'm just not good at what I do anymore. Like it's just really weird.
Right.
Like, and so now that seems to disappear a lot. Not totally. We still kind of face that whole like, oh, those guys were, a part of this or a part of that, so I don't want anything to do with them. Nowadays, that seems to just not be as much of a thing anymore. And I'm glad for that, because it just sort of breaks down those barriers and just allows people to just enjoy things for what they are and not for any other, superfluous reason that doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing.
Well, I think because that gets to, at least for me, it feels like because that scene is over, everything that was, it feels like, I mean, it was a huge part of my childhood and I loved it. And I don't feel like, even with all the knowledge, like what you were saying, I don't think I would have traded these bands that I was into. I don't think I would have traded like growing up and showing up at youth group and like having all these bands that we thought were just this shit that we'd worshipped and idolized and thought they were super awesome. All of that looks totally different to me now, having been inside of it and kind of seeing that it all kind of feels like smoke and mirrors and seeing the damage that it does to people, and at least for our experience in there. But yeah, like I feel like I appreciate it for what it was, but I don't feel the need to like recreate that. And I feel like exactly what you're saying, it's just a totally different landscape in which to exist now. Like there's not the expectation of, these 350 bands that are all a part of this one scene to one degree or the other,
right,
that they all be touting this pro-American, evangelism that seems like it was so permeated into the message of that Christian rock subculture, which is always what made it feel so icky to us. And we just didn't have a vocabulary for how to speak about it. And if we did, it more often than not meant that we didn't get invited back to play places. And so we just kind of kept our mouths shut and cashed checks for a little while we were figuring it out. So
no, I mean, I don't know, I don't have any reason to like, or any evidence to suggest that this is true, but I would say that like probably a lot of bands did that, right? Like they fell into it, they did it, they cashed the checks and they moved on. I mean, like, I feel like that has to have been a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're saying it, we're to a degree saying it because like we just sort of integrated into this scene. We didn't really fit. What we were doing musically had nothing to do with like what the bands that would stand on stage and preach for 15 minutes were doing. Like we just didn't do that. And whenever we were asked, whenever we would show up early on, whenever we would show up at shows on tour, like, well, halfway through your set, we want to have our youth pastor come up and it's like, we don't really have a halfway through our set. Like we bang, 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 and we play 40 minutes straight through. We don't even stop. Like we don't even talk. Like I don't even know what you're talking about here, but like, yeah, I mean, like that kind of thing. You got to figure there was other people out there that were just like, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead, but are you going to give me the money at the end of the night? Like, and so that felt weird to us. Like we didn't want that.
Right.
We never wanted that. And it was never something that we were like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, please come interrupt our show to like do this sort of thing like that.
Yeah.
You never, like we're talking about now. That's just not even a thing. That whole scene, and maybe it exists somewhere. I don't know. I feel like it can't have just disappeared completely.
I think
right?
it exists.
Like this whole idea.
I just don't think it's making enough people money to care.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, there are those bands. I mean, you can turn on any, Christian radio station and see like the same 6 people who were probably doing it when we were all a part of there too, just riding that last wave of all these radio stations around the country that are playing these same songs over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I don't feel like anything, like nobody's breaking any new ground. You know what I mean? Like the way that music is changing and evolving and moving with culture and becoming more beautiful, becoming more experimental and more reflective of society and culture at large, I feel is not happening within the Christian music world.
yeah, for sure. For sure. So different environment. I mean, I suppose I guess to put it bluntly, I don't really care. Like that whole, like whatever it is now doesn't impact me at all, because we don't, at this point, we're not even like, that's not even a thing anymore. Right. Like, when we book shows, we're just out there doing our thing, and it's not even like a part of any sort of scene or, movement or whatever you want to call it.
I love that.
So it's just whatever. But I don't know where to go from there.
Do you remember what the absolute worst moment in your band was? Like your dark night of the soul. It could be like after a show happened and you guys got into a huge fight. Could be whenever you guys had the van broken into in Dallas. Was there a moment where you were like, "Oh, it's over. It's over now"?
All right, so that's a great question, but I'm going to pause you for a second because we talked about this like an hour ago.
Oh, okay.
But my daughter just came in with a new drawing that she did.
Oh my gosh!
I don't know if you can see that.
That is gorgeous.
That's her, and that's all three of my kids basically. That's her and my two sons.
So talented.
And she just So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, don't on your daughter as much as you want. That's awesome.
She came in, she's showing it to me, and I'm like, all right, let me stop and pause for a second.
Yeah.
All right, so I think all things considered, that theft in Dallas is probably it. It's one that, unfortunately, I don't want to say the word unfortunately because that's not the right word, but Cliff wasn't in the band at that time, so like he didn't get to experience that. So when I say that that's the worst moment, I'm kind of speaking just from my perspective and probably from Josh's perspective too, because he was in the band too. But Chris, our current drummer, wasn't there, and Cliff wasn't in the band at that moment. So I would imagine that they would or Chris probably wouldn't have a worse moment because he's been in the band for like 4 years and everything's been amazing in the last 4 years. But no, Cliff may have a different answer, but that would be it for me. I mean, good grief, man! A month and a half before I quit a job that I was making tons of money at, and tons is a stupid word to use, but I was making good money. Like I was making like career type money.
Adult money.
Adult money. Right. Yeah. I was adulting at that point. And to go do this touring thing, and then just all shattered. That was it for sure. Yeah. For me, that was it for sure. Darkest moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. Because we all had set out with like super, not like expectations of like, fame and fortune or anything, but just, we can really make this work. And honestly, for the year ahead of that, when I was taking off work and taking leaves of absence and things like that to go do this sort of thing, it was working. Like we were doing okay.
Yeah.
And then when I bit the bullet and said, all right, leave the job, go do it for real, that happens. And yeah. So that would certainly be the worst for me.
Do you remember what the best moment in the band was? The one that just made you feel all powerful?
Maybe I'll answer this two ways. Okay. So I'm going to split the answer into two different things.
Okay.
Getting the call from Arturo Vega, who was the art director for the Ramones. So he designed that seal, that presidential seal that had their names around it. The famous, iconic logo that everybody knows from the Ramones. Calling our guitar player Josh, saying, "We got your Ramones, Follow the Ramones record in the mail." This was, I suppose at some point I have to give some context on this, but Joey listened to it and he wants you guys to be the band that he plays with at this event, that's coming up.
It's unreal, dude. It's unreal.
Yeah. It's stupid. It's just stupid. Like Josh was in the band for like 3 months or something, and he catches wind of this like event that's happening at CBGB's where it's a launch of a new website for the Ramones, and it's after they had already broken up, obviously, but they're still trying to kind of keep things going and sell merch and promote the band. Hey, Ramones we want bands to come up and play Ramones covers, and it's sort of a competition per se. And whoever Joey's going to listen to the bands all night, and whoever Joey likes the most, he's going to play a set of Ramones songs with at the end of the night. So we're going to pick a bunch of bands. You come up, play a couple of Ramones songs. Joey, American Idol before American Idol was a thing, right?
Right.
He sits there and Ramones Idol. He judges you, and he picks the ones that he likes the best, and he plays with them. And in order to get into the show, you had to submit a recording of you playing Ramones songs.
Of course.
And so we submitted the Fall Under Ramones record. We caught wind of this really last minute. Josh overnighted Fall Under Ramones in, and the guy that designed the Ramones seal, Arturo Vega, called Josh, 2 days later. Hey, I had Joey come over and listen to it. I listened to it. I called Joey over. He listened to it. You're in. He's playing with you. So before the quote unquote competition even happened, we had already been selected as the band that he was going to play with.
That's amazing, dude. It's amazing.
It doesn't even make sense to me now.
That didn't happen to any other band. That was your band.
No. Yeah.
I just mean like that of all the things that feel like so intrinsically worth something on this kind of like really cool level of being in a band. It's like these moments that kind of make it worth it. It's like you're the only band that has happened to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. Yeah. There's only one of that in the history of the world.
Yeah. And so, he tells Josh, so Joey will call you in a couple of days and tell you what songs he wants to play. And Josh is basically just like jawed to the floor, like, okay, like, all right, okay. And so sure enough, Joey calls him up. Hey, talks to him for a while. These are the songs I want to do with you guys. And so it was all worked out ahead of time. And every other, as unfortunate as it may be, every other band showed up to that show thinking that they had an opportunity to play their best, Ramones, and win Ramones Idol or American Ramones Idol to play with Joey at the end of the night. But it was all predetermined. We already had a set list and everything. We showed up at 3:00 in the afternoon. We sound checked with him, before anybody else showed up. We sound checked with him at CBGB's to make sure everything was good. There was a pre-party at Arturo's loft right around the corner. We were the only band invited to it. So CJ Ramon was there. First time we ever met him. Joey was there. Chris Stein from Blondie. All these people that we had no business being around were there. And it's just like, why are we here right now? So that for sure, I mean, it really does stand out, and I just can't put anything above that, really. Just ridiculous that that even happened. And then, a year later, he contacted us again and had us play with him again. It was billed as Joey Ramone and Friends, and he was releasing a solo record. And so we got to play an actual full Huntington set that night, which was kind of cool, like a 30-minute Huntington set. And then a bunch of other bands played it. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember Wheatus? They had that band called Teenage Dirtbag. They had a song called Teenage Dirtbag.
I just had Brendan on the show a few weeks ago, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. Like that band was great, and I guess they just whatever happened, but they played, and Ronnie Spector from the Ronettes did a solo set of Ronettes songs, from the 60s, and then Joey did a solo set, and then we capped off the night doing another Ramones set with him a year later, and just crazy that any of that ever happened. So for sure that would be, the high point,
man.
But I was saying I was going to split it in two because honestly, I feel like coming back together and making an album after, the last time we did a record was in 2003.
Yeah.
And so darn near 17 years later, coming back and doing it again, that's kind of a high point for me too. I mean, it's certainly not at the level of being asked to come play with Joey Ramone, but it really feels awesome to just be able to just keep doing it. And all of us kind of had doubts that it was going to be able to be a thing. You know what? We did this 20 years ago. That's fine. Let it be. We'll keep playing shows and play those 20-year-old songs. like to be able to come together and make it actually happen, and me and everybody be really like happy and proud of like what we've done is a pretty big deal. So I would put actually both of those sort of in that mix. The Joey one for sure higher, but like, you know, being able to come together after that long and just create some new stuff after almost 20 years being out of the game is pretty cool too.
That's awesome, man. Well, I love that. I actually got the chance to sneak peek the new record, and we're gonna put a link to that in the show notes for the show for everybody that wants to check that out. But I just want to say how grateful I am that you guys are sort of dusting everything off and deciding to make some new records. I got really nervous whenever the Pixies did that a few years ago.
Yeah.
Because I was afraid that it just like wouldn't be the thing. And since they've come back, it's like some of my favorite material from them is some of their newer stuff. And I feel like it's important, even just from an artistic standpoint, to express yourself in that way and to not constantly be stuck in that state of nostalgia of like, well, let's just keep playing the same thing and like redoing the whole thing, but creating life and putting new energy into something completely brand new, regardless of how commercially successful or unsuccessful that thing might be. At the end of the day, it sounds like you've figured out the secret to deriving joy from it, which is doing it for you guys and doing it in a way that you experience the fulfillment of being able to make new music. And I feel like that's so important, and just want to pat you on the back for that.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much. And like, and it really does sum it up. Like, while I hope many, many people, you know, get the record and enjoy it, couldn't give two shits if anybody enjoys it, because I think it's awesome.
Yes! Oh, I love that.
It's like, seriously, like we've taken, this has been the longest, like from beginning to end of like starting to write a record to recording it to releasing it. This has been the longest process that we've ever had for any record we've ever done. And the whole time has just been such a good experience, like all the way through the writing, through the rehearsals, through the recording, through everything has been so positive about it that like, for sure, I want it to be accepted by people who have been, you know, who have liked us in the past. Sure. Like, I want people who liked us 20 years ago to think that this record's really good. Like, I want that. But at the end of the day, it's like, if for some reason I've miscalculated or we've miscalculated what we should be doing here, like, and we've totally screwed up this album, I don't care. Like, whatever. You don't like it, couldn't give a shit. Like, I like it. I've been listening to it for months now, and the rest of the guys have liked it and or love it. I guess I should love it, really. And that's really what's important. And hopefully other people do too. But at the end of the day, it's like, if you do, cool. If you don't, whatever. I don't care.
I love that intrinsic confidence that you have. It sounds like you're really proud of it. And that means something. I feel like as an artist to be releasing something that you think is badass. It's a totally different experience than something that's kind of put together by more hands than yours and that you feel like kind of out of control of and that you don't have a connection to. So I don't think that you have made a piece of shit that nobody's going to like. I think it's the exact opposite of that.
well, that's good to hear. But like, one of the things that we did when we came together, you know, a year and a half ago or whenever we started this is like, we're going to start rehearsing new stuff. And if it doesn't feel right, we're just going to stop. Like, we're not going to force something that we don't want. Yeah. And, you know, whether it be luck of the draw or whatever the case may be, chemistry, whatever it is, it came together. And honestly, like, it's the most cohesively written record we've ever done. Like, a lot of the stuff we did in the past was, okay, you wrote that song, we're going in the studio and record it. I wrote this song, we're going to the studio and record it. This was just work, rearrange, cut parts, move parts, do this, do that. And, you know, most people listening to it probably won't listen to it and think, oh yeah, that really sounds like they really cohesively worked on that. Like, that's not something that's going to basically, you know, it's going to come across. Right. But that's the truth of it. And that being the case, that really means something to me. And that's why I'm so adamant about saying I really don't care if anybody else that's part of the reason I say that. I'm not just trying to be like, this, he's just being a dick or whatever. Like, we really did something that we set out to do, and I'm super proud of it. And that being the case is like, I hope other people like it. I want other people to like it because that helps us. You know what I mean? Like, if you buy the record, maybe we'll make another one. If you don't, we won't, whatever. But like, either way, I'm good. And we're good.
Well,
with it,
I'm proud of you for doing that. Yes, and I think it's going to be awesome. Dude, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know it's getting super late. Yeah. This is probably the latest we've ever recorded a podcast, so I'm going to let you get to your kids before they drift off to sleep. But man, thank you so much for being a part of this and sharing your heart and and your passion and your joy and your stories. Like, that's what the show is all about, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, great. I appreciate you having me on. And this was fun. Like, I could probably talk for another 3 hours.
Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Eleventy Life